The empire that was established by Charlemagne had an enormous impact on the history and culture of Western Europe. It oversaw the greatest territorial expansion in Western Europe since the days of the Roman Empire, and promoted a period of cultural development known as the Carolingian Renaissance. The splendor of the realm would fade away with the multiple Carolingian members who succeeded Charlemagne. In this video, we will look at the heirs of the Carolingian Empire, its complicated splintering, and how Europe developed following the end of the dynasty. The sponsor of today's video, Manscaped, probably can't save an empire from falling, but it can save your love life. Manscaped knows both the necessity and difficulties of grooming, and their Performance Package Kit is the product manufactured perfectly to provide solutions to every grooming need and alleviate every fear. The new Lawnmower 3.0 is a waterproof trimmer with advanced skin-safe technology, which means no nicks, no cuts, no way to electrocute yourself. Its no-slip grip and LED light make shaving easy and comfortable in the most difficult areas. Manscaped even created a deodorant called Crop Preserver and a toner spray, which is a game changer for how you smell. This is a weed whacker. It will trim your nose and ear hair and stop you from looking like a caveman. Now the Manscaped package includes Shears 2.0, the luxury kit for your toes and nails. For a limited time you get all this plus 2 free gifts, the Shed travel bag and the Manscaped anti-chafing boxer briefs. Go to manscaped.com today and get 20% off plus free international shipping, plus 2 free gifts when you use promo code KINGS at manscaped.com. Your balls and your body will thank you. Charles the Great, the conqueror of the Saxons and Lombards, and the first Western monarch to be crowned emperor after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, had intended in 806 to divide up his kingdom among his male children, as was the custom for the Carolingian and Merovingian dynasties. Excluded from the division were the illegitimate children, including Charles's controversial first son Pepin and his daughters, as the Salic law of the Franks did not allow them to inherit land. Following the death of Charlemagne in 814, the crown of the Frankish kingdom and the imperial title passed to his only surviving son, Louis the Pious. To ease our understanding and lessen the confusion over the numerous family members, we're going to use the nicknames with which they are usually known as today, even though it might be anachronistic. The new emperor soon decided to divide up his dominion, both to safeguard the empire from future internal conflict among his sons in case of his death, and to help administer the huge swaths of land. In the Ordinatio Imperii of 817, preparations were made to divide up his lands. His eldest son Lothair was proclaimed co-emperor and would be the suzerain over his family members, while his other 2 sons, Pepin of Aquitaine and Louis the German, received Aquitaine and Bavaria as kings. The division did not satisfy all. First of all, a surviving nephew of Louis, Bernard, had kept the title of King of Italy following the death of his father Pepin, son of Charlemagne. Worried that his position was threatened, and unhappy with becoming a vassal of his cousin Lothair, the King of Italy began to plot against the emperor, but he was swiftly arrested with his conspirators and was blinded. The Carolingians were not as good at blinding deposed family members as the Byzantines, and Bernard died from his wounds, leaving behind a newborn son who would live on and establish a cadet branch in Vermandois. The execution of a member of the Carolingian family, although involuntary, became a stain on the reputation of Louis. The emperor had to undergo public penance for the death of his nephew, which made him look weak in the eyes of the nobility. Another problem that arose was the birth of a 4th son, Charles the Bald. He was born in Louis's 2nd marriage, and the emperor wanted to leave him a domain to rule over, like he had with his elder sons. This sparked a lot of frictions among the family members. The decade from 830 to 840 was marred by constant fighting between the father and his sons, with Louis being deposed and then reinstated in 832. Another threat that emerged were the Viking raids, which began during Louis's reign, and would be a constant thorn in the side of the Carolingian rulers. In 840, Louis died of sickness, leaving the imperial title and the central part of his realm to Lothair I. the eastern part to Louis the German, and the western part to Charles the Bald. Louis's second son, Pepin of Aquitaine, had died in 838, and his sons were ousted for the succession in Aquitaine, although the eldest of Pippin II would continue to claim the kingdom for himself in the following decades. Once ascended to the throne, Lothaire I attempted to claim the whole empire for himself, but his brothers banded together against him by swearing the Oath of Strasbourg and defeated Lothaire's army at the Battle of Fontenoy. Hostilities came to an end in the famous Treaty of Verdun of 843, which sanctioned the division of the Carolingian Empire into 3 pieces. Lothaire kept the imperial title and was assigned the lands along the Rhine and Meuse rivers, the heartland of the Carolingian territory, the Rhine Valley and Italy, creating a corridor from the modern-day Netherlands to Provence. Charles the Bald became the king of the Western Franks, encompassing Neustria and Aquitaine in modern France and the Spanish March, while Louis the German became king of the Eastern Franks, ruling over Saxony, Alemannia, Franconia and Bavaria. The Treaty of Verdun has been viewed by historians as one of the most important events of European history, as it gave birth to the polities that would develop into the modern states of France and Germany, while the central state would become the battlegrounds for future European conflicts. The central part of the empire, sometimes called Middle Francia, and the imperial crown, thus passed to Lothaire I. The morphology of his realm made it difficult to defend, stretched as it was from north to south, and with many different cultures and people in its borders. He spent most of his reign defending it from Viking raids in the north and Saracen attacks from the south of Italy, who had sacked St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome in the year 846. He gave the task to rule and defend Italy to his eldest son, Louis II, who recaptured Benevento from the Saracens, and for this was crowned co-emperor and king of Italy. Lothaire remained in the old Carolingian heartland around Aachen and ruled there until 855 when he died. In the Treaty of Prüm, his lands were once again divided up among his 3 surviving sons. Louis II was confirmed king of Italy and inherited the imperial crown. Lothaire II obtained the modern-day Low Countries, Lorraine and part of Burgundy, while the youngest son, Charles of Provence, still a kid, was given Provence and the southern part of Burgundy. Charles of Provence, who was around 10 years old at the death of his father, came under the regency of local nobles and had to fend off the ambitious Charles the Bald. In 860, a treaty at Koblenz reaffirmed the arrangement among the brothers, but 3 years later Charles died and his realm was divided along the Rhone River by his brothers. Lothaire II, who would give his name to the region of Lorraine, or Lotharingia in German, is mostly remembered for his struggles to divorce his wife Tutberga, who had not sired him children, so he could marry his mistress Waldrada, who had given him children. Lothaire spent most of his resources trying to garner support from his family members to have the marriage annulled, something they were not too keen to do, hoping to inherit the land of the heirless king. In the year 869, while returning to Rome, where the Pope had given his consent for the annulment, he died of a fever. His lands in Lotharingia were swiftly divided in the Treaty of Meissen between his uncles, Louis the German and Charles the Bald, declaring Lothaire's children illegitimate, while his brother Louis II did not have the support from the local nobles to overrule the occupation. Louis II ruled the Kingdom of Italy in some form from 842. He spent much of his reign going to war against the Saracens, who had occupied Sicily, Bari and Taranto by this time. He hoped to expand outside of Italy, first by inheriting the crown of the King of Provence from his minor brother, but he was unsuccessful in retaining the legacy of his father in Lotharingia. He thus decided instead to concentrate his efforts on unifying the rest of Italy, and in 871 he managed to expel the Arabs from Bari and tried to establish his rule over the smaller duchies of southern Italy. He fell ill in 875 and died near Brescia without any male heir, He wanted to leave the Italian kingdom to his cousin Carloman of Bavaria, but the king of the Western Franks, Charles the Bald, invaded first and took Italy and Provence for himself. The youngest of the three sons of Louis the Pious, Charles, nicknamed the Bald, inherited the kingdom of the Western Franks, which had been one of the main reasons for conflict with Louis the German and Lothair. Charles spent the first years of his reign campaigning in Aquitaine, where his nephew Pepin II had gathered the support of the local Aquitanian nobility and Viking raiders, while rebellious Bretons regained their autonomy, defeating Charles. Both the unrest in Aquitaine and the Viking raids, which in 845, under the command of a certain Ragnar, managed to occupy Paris and force the king to pay a ransom for the city, continued to plague his reign up to the 860s. Threats did not only come from external entities, as he also quarrelled with his other family members, such as his nephew Louis the Young, who invaded to take over Aquitaine. Charles also expanded his dominion. After attempting to take over Provence twice, he took over half of the Kingdom of Lotharingia in 869, following the death of Lothair II. Charles the Bald's brother, Louis the German, instead inherited the eastern part of the Kingdom of the Franks. The region had been populated by various Germanic tribes and polities such as the Bavarians, Saxons, Alemannians and Franconians. Louis was an effective ruler and managed to defend his lands against the neighbouring Danes, Slavs and Hungarians, but he often quarrelled with his youngest brother, especially once their realms bordered, and he had to quell the insurrections of his sons, Carloman of Bavaria, Louis the Young and Charles the Fat. When the Emperor Louis II died in 875, it began a convoluted time in the Frankish kingdom that would briefly see it reunited. Charles the Bald was the fastest one to cross the Alps and take over the Kingdom of Italy with the support of the Pope, but was confronted by Carloman of Bavaria, who had been designated as the heir to the kingdom and had the support of the greatest feudal lords of Italy. The ensuing conflict saw Charles victorious, who was crowned emperor, but was attacked and defeated the following year on the Rhine by the Eastern Franks. The following year, 876, Louis the German died, and his kingdom was divided among his sons as previously stipulated. Carloman received Bavaria, Louis the Young obtained Saxony, Franconia and eastern Lotharingia, and the youngest, Charles the Fat, inherited Swabia, Alemannia and Alsace. In October 877, Charles the Bald, the last son of Louis the Pious, also died, leaving his kingdom to his only son, Louis the Stammerer. Carloman of Bavaria had already invaded Italy a few months before and had been crowned Emperor and King of Italy, but he soon fell ill. The year 879 saw new developments. In the eastern half of the realm, the ailing Carloman gave the title of King of Italy and Emperor to his brother Charles the Fat, while his second brother Louis the Young occupied Bavaria, ignoring the claims of Carloman's bastard child Arnulf of Carinthia. In the west, Louis the Stammerer also died, leaving his kingdom to his two sons Carloman II and Louis III, the first becoming king of Neustria and the latter king of Aquitaine, while an unborn son, Charles the Simple, would become king at a later date. In this year we also find the first rebellion and declaration of independence of a non-Carolingian family member, when Boso of Provence declared himself King of Provence. In 880, the Treaty of Ribemont, the last among the Carolingians, was meant to seal the peace among the feuding family branches and to defeat the Provençal usurper, but the latter didn't happen. Meanwhile, Lotharingia was unified under Louis the Young, but then in 882, Louis the Young and Louis III died without male descendants, with their realms being absorbed by their respective brothers. While in 884, Carloman II also died, which meant that the whole Carolingian realm was now controlled by Charles the Fat, unified for the first time since 840. Although the records of his failures are exaggerated, it is true that Charles the Fat still failed to keep the enormous realm together. It was simply too big to govern by himself, and with the constant threat of Norman invasion, such as the Siege of Paris of 886, which was lifted only after a heavy ransom. The king, sick and unpopular, was deposed in 887 and died a few weeks later by a council of nobles at Tribur, headed by his nephew Arnulf of Carinthia. This marked the end of an era, as no longer would the empire ever again be unified. The reason for the dissolution of Carolingian power has been historically attributed to the ineptitude of the numerous kings and their infighting, which certainly had its part. The rise of the aristocracy has also been pointed out as a reason, giving a clean and easy explanation for how power went from the centralized state to the periphery, though some modern scholars argue that the powerful nobles who were in the intermediary with the lower nobility of a region were crucial for the emperors to keep their power. However, when Charles the Fat was deposed, only the illegitimate Arnulf and Charles the Simple, still a child, were left as Carolingian candidates, and as Boso of Provence had demonstrated, it was possible for a non-Carolingian to take over the crown themselves in a power vacuum, just as they had with the Merovingian dynasty. Also, the constant Viking raids, although not a direct reason for the fall of the Carolingians, did weaken and stretch their forces on multiple fronts. When Arnulf of Carinthia deposed his uncle, he became king of the Eastern Franks and of Lotharingia, where he would reign until his death in 899. He focused his efforts on defending against Norman attacks and campaigning in Italy. Following his death, he was succeeded by his son Louis the Child, who oversaw the beginning of the Magyar raids. When he died after 12 years of reign, the powerful dukes of the kingdom decided to elect one of them as king to confront the Hungarian threat, first Conrad of Franconia and later Henry of Saxony, who began the Ottonian dynasty. In other parts of the empire, the nobles who had been the closest collaborators of Charles the Fat and had a fluid network of patronage and allegiance within the aristocracy took over in their respective regions as reguli or petty kings. In western Francia, Odo of Paris was elected king and had some success against the Vikings, while in Aquitaine, Ranulf took power. The kingdom was plagued for the following half a decade by a struggle for power among the other great families of the kingdom, the Robertians and the Bossonids. Charles the Simple inherited the crown after Odo and retook Lotharingia, but would be deposed in 922. The Carolingians returned to power in 936 and gave 3 more kings until 987, when Louis V died and was finally succeeded by Hugh Capet, who founded the Capetian dynasty. Lotharingia remained bound to the eastern kingdom of the Franks apart from a short period, while in southeastern France, 2 kingdoms emerged, the Kingdom of Provence and the Kingdom of Burgundy. They would be united in marriage and be remembered as the Kingdom of Arles, which would be absorbed into the Holy Roman Empire in the 11th century. Finally, Italy went through a period known as the Anarchy, where local dukes and foreign rulers fought over the imperial crown and the kingdom, until 951, when Otto I of Saxony invaded Italy and would later become Holy Roman Emperor, uniting the fate of northern Italy to the empire. We're planning to make more videos on the history of Europe, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.